Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to my lecture. So today we are going to talk about demand function, income and consumption, how they interact to each other, and based on individuals' income, how consumption pattern change and how demand function changes accordingly. So today we are going to talk about how demand for any commodity changes based on the income of the individuals and how consumption pattern changes through our microeconomic concepts that we'll discuss. Um, so in the factors influencing demand, we'll discuss in details now. So we have divided into two parts. One is internal factors, and then the other one is external factors. In the external factors, we have divided into two parts. One is economic factors, the other one is non-economic factors. So there are set of internal factors and also set of external factors, and in set of external factors we have set of economic factors and also a set of non-economic factors. So let's begin with the internal factors, and then we'll see that how demand function or the demand curve changes. So there are three broad points that we discuss here, and we know as a student of economics, like one is changes of the price of the goods itself, then how demand curve changes, and the other one is service policies and the payment policies that also create or push demand function to change, and the other one is profit margin in the market. So let us take the first example, like what happens in the demand curve when price of the particular commodity changes and how commodity demanded will be there. So as we know, if we simply draw this particular discussion, like price of commodity say X, and then quantity will be measured, or quantity demanded for commodity X will be measured along with the x-axis. And then as we know that demand function is downward sloping, and we already know that why this demand function is downward sloping. We already know this is because of law of diminishing returns. And then see here, like on this particular commodity X, like at P, at say point A, there are 2 or 3 points we can take on a demand curve, and here say demand curve is dx, and here we have taken 3 points. One is A, one is B, the other one is C. At point A, OP1 amount of price will be determined at the market for OQ1 amount of quantity demanded for say commodity X. On point B, price will be reduced from OP to OP2, but then quantity will be increased from OQ1 to OQ2. Likewise, on point C, price will further reduce, say P3, and then quantity. So as we know that price and quantity, they are inversely related. So if price of the goods decreases, then quantity of the demand of that particular commodity like X will be increased. Vice versa, like if price of the commodity X is increasing, then quantity demanded for X will be decreasing. So this is how internally demand function gets sort of impacted, and that's how price and quantity relation will actually be changed. So now let's move to the next. For the external factors, and here we are planning to discuss about economic and non-economic. Let us begin with the economic factors. So what are the economic factors? The first is price of the related commodities. So here we are not talking about say only changes of the price of X, how quantity demanded for X will be reacted. Here suppose commodity X and Y, if price of Y is changing, how demand for commodity X will be changing. So these are the functional relation that we are trying to understand here. So it is basically the first case is price of related commodities. If that changes, how it gets impacted on the other commodity, like say commodity X. So suppose we have two commodities, like say commodity X and commodity Y, and our primary analysis on the commodity will be on X. And now here, since we have another commodity, here we have taken only two, like X and Y. It could be X, Y, Z, or n number of commodities. So what happens if changes of the price of the other commodities which are closely substitute to X, and then how demand for X will be changing. So there are 2 points here that we'll discuss. One is substitute goods, the other case that we'll be talking about, which is complementary commodities, right? So in the substitute goods, it's like if X and Y are closely substitute, then only will be considered that. If X and Y are not closely substitute, then obviously demand for X will be indifferent or independent to demand for Y. If X is dependent on Y, or X and Y are closely substituted, then demand for X will be changing on the change of the change of the Y, and likewise. So let us take the example. Like for example, here say coffee and tea. These two are very basic examples that you will find any of the textbooks. So if we are considering and assuming, suppose that coffee and tea, these two hot beverages are very closely substitute for person A or person B. But if somebody is not thinking like tea will be substituted by coffee, or coffee is will be substituted by tea, if that is not the case, then of course this particular example will not be taken as an example for the substitute goods. So here the assumption is tea and coffee both are closely substitute. So suppose Y is coffee and X is tea. Now suppose price of coffee increases. As a law for the demand for coffee, then demand for quantity demand for coffee will be decreasing. But then for me as an individual, for me I'm indifferent to choose between coffee and tea, because I find coffee and tea both are closely substitute commodities, and therefore I'll be indifferent to have coffee or tea, because my utility that I'm deriving from coffee or from tea both are same. And therefore the moment I'll see as an individual, as a rational individual, if I see the price of coffee has gone up, so generally my tendency will be to reduce my demand or dependency on the consumption of coffee and increase the demand or increase the consumption of the tea, and therefore consumption or quantity demanded for X will be increased. So you can see here there is no internal changes between price and quantity for tea, but then quantity demanded for tea is increasing because of changes in the price of coffee. So this is the first case where we say that, in case of substitute goods, if price changes, what happens between price and quantity demanded for the other commodity. So now let's move for the next example. It is basically for the complementary goods, and here again this example is quite basic for any of the textbook that you can find. pen and ink. So for example, price of pen is increasing, and then obviously quantity demand for pen also will be decreased, but then quantity demanded for ink also will be decreased. So that is what, case of complementary goods. For example, we can also take, say, from public policies point of view, like say example of public infrastructure. So take the example of say public infrastructure, or say public transportation, say any of the cities in India. So metro stations or access to metro for any individuals will be difficult um, if any person in the city will have very poor connectivity to reach to the metro stations. And therefore for local transportation, like say um, Ola or Uber, or say local taxi, or say local auto, if that have very poor connectivity, then certainly people who wants to access the metro station, they also will have some impact on their their demand for the metro. So these two are, of course, are not related, but then they are complementary to each other. So price of one commodity will be impacting on the demand for the another commodity. So this is the second case that we are talking about under economic factors and based on the related price of the related goods. So now let's move to the second point, like consumers income. So this is also very important, and this is part of the economic factor. Here two types of commodity we'll be taking as an example, and then we'll discuss. So consumers income also very important for demanding for any commodity. So there are two concepts. So one is normal goods, where a product that increases in demand with an increase in income. uh, Say I'm taking example of, say, car or books or clothes. If they are normal, so if my income increases, if I demand for more books, then certainly books will be considered as a normal goods, right? I'm not taking those examples that as my income increases and I'm decreasing my demand for books. So that is a different case. Then books will be inferior goods. But my assumptions here, as an academician and as a student of economics, then if my income increases along with my rise in income, I'll buy more books on economics, and therefore demand for goods books here, like economic books, will be normal goods. Likewise car, if my income increases and if I buy car, private vehicle, then private vehicle, that car will be considered as normal goods. Likewise, if I demand for more clothes, as my income increases, then clothes or those particular garments will be considered as normal goods, right? So in case of inferior goods, here um, a product that decreases in demand with an increase in the income. For example, like say if I buy the car as my income increases, that means that I reduce my demand, or I actually reduce my access to public transportations, because I'm not using more public transportation, because I'm using more private transportations. Then public transportation will be considered as inferior goods, because it is getting reduced, special demand for public transportation getting reduced because of my rise in my income. Or say low grade rice, so if my income increases, then I'll go for high or premium quality of rice, like say premium basmati, and then definitely basmati will be considered as um, normal goods. But then low quality of rice that I actually give up to buy more premium rice, then low quality or low graded rice will be considered as inferior commodities. So how it changes, let us just a simple draw with the help of this simple graphical illustration. Let us see how it happens. Let's say here commodity Y, here commodity X, and here like say budget line, and then as income increases, then budget line parallelly shifts to AB to A dash B dash, and therefore my utility also shifts from A to say B, and then certainly B is higher than A, because B I'm on at point B I'm on the higher utility curve as an individual for the commodity between X and Y. So as my budget increases, I move towards the higher utility curve, and satisfaction level also high. So this is basically happens when consumers income changes, and we can also see what happens if consumer incomes decreases. Then I'll also get into the lower utility curve, which is say at point C, where budget line and utility uh, they are actually tangent to with each other at point C. So there are a couple of other non-economic factors which has direct and indirect impacts on the demand, and then that's how demand curve also shifts and responds. So one of the most important factors, non-economic factors, which is also very difficult to calculate, is basically the consumers' tastes and preferences. And it also depends on the various socio-economic variables, like of course demand for certain commodities will vary and depend across the age, across the gender, across the race, across the marital status and level of educations. So we can't say that there will be universal test for certain commodity that any age group will be having it. So for instance, demand for certain commodities will be different for school going children than elderly people, or in fact there will be difference in taste and preferences between school going children and college going students. So there of course these are socioeconomic factors which actually impact on the taste and preferences. Second point is taxation, that we'll discuss much more in details in our ensuing lectures. Like if tax is imposed on consumer or tax is imposed on the producers, then how that actually push or that how that changes the demand function for the consumer, or that how it pushes to consumer to make different kind of demands for that particular commodity. So taxation plays very important role, and that is where role of government, like how government interfere or intervene in the market, and how demand function changes. Likewise supply function for the producer also will be changing based on the taxation. If tax imposed or either on consumer or on producers, then tax burden also will be shared. It is not like if it is imposed on the consumer, then consumer will entirely bear the cost, or if it is imposed on the producers, it is not that producer entirely bear the cost and entire price will be shifted to the consumer. So it is basically the share between consumer and producer. We'll discuss much more in details when we proceed further, especially in the units where we'll be talking about taxation and optimal taxation and tax incidence and tax burden. So now advertisement has a lot of impact on the demand, and therefore we see various celebrities who are actually advertised for certain commodities. We can see any of the commodities, especially luxury commodities or even basic necessities that we see. There are significant amount of costs that are involved in the advertisement, which actually create or which actually make changes on the demand for the that particular commodities. Fourth point is expected future price of that particular commodity. So when we see that certain commodity might have better price or might give better price in future, and therefore which either we hoard or we actually or buy in advance, so that we can get more expected value for those commodity will be higher, and that is how our expected utility will be higher. And but then it has the impact on the demand, and we will discuss this also in details when we talk about expected utility and expected value of any commodity, and how it has impact on the public policy and then public goods. uh, point fifth, point 5 actually talks about festive seasons in a year, like across various seasons. One particular commodity, it will have different kind of demand. For instance, during Diwali, demand for sweets and or candles or lights, it will be higher as compared to any other seasons, like for instance during any other events that we can imagine. Even during Christmas, demand for certain commodities will be increasing as compared to other time, like during monsoon time of that particular commodities. um, Likewise, climate change also plays very important role, because our for basic necessity, like for agricultural commodities which highly depend on the climatic conditions, and then for any extreme events, agricultural commodities and agriculture sector gets impacted, and price for that particular commodity also will be changing, and demand for commodity also will be changing. Like during monsoon, certain commodities, say agricultural commodities, it will be price for those commodities will be increasing as compared to say the same commodity that we see in the winter or in summer. So these are the 6 broad non-economic factors which has direct and indirect impact on the demand. So let us move to the next point, and which is a very important point that we are talking about, and that is income effect. And then from income effect, we already had shown income effect, but then here we are talking about income consumption curve, like how based on my income, how demand for that particular commodity will be changing, and how they are actually interrelated. So let us first understand what is income consumption curve. So by definition, income consumption curve shows the utility maximizing combinations of two goods as a consumer's income changes, right? So let us explain this with the help of graphical illustration. And this is also for the for reviewing of our couple of microeconomic concepts that we are actually supposed to know, and this is also very important to know before knowing public policy. If we treat public policy as a commodity, and then how that actually depends on individuals income or national income, and then consumption, and then how we can actually apply in case of public policy from microeconomics, and also in case of macroeconomics. So let us draw this. Like say here, say commodity Y along with the Y axis, and say commodity X along with the horizontal axis or X axis. And as we know that this is like individuals budget line AB, and here utility maximization point at A means for individual utility is getting tangent at point A with the budget line AB, and here A is a small a. So now suppose income increases, so budget line first shifts parallel to AB to A dash B dash, and then I am having higher utility maximizing point like small p, and here utility 2 curve. Now we get higher income and therefore higher budget line. So higher budget line is A double dash and B double dash, and here utility 3, and here say C point, small c is a point, and certainly utility at point C is higher than, say utility at point C is higher than utility at point B, and utility for B at point B is higher than utility A. So this is like, as our income increases, then we'll go for the higher utility curve. So if we add all this point A, B and C, that's how the definition is, shows the utility maximization combinations of two commodities like A, B, C. All these 3 points are actually combinations of goods and services of, say, between X and Y. Like say at point A it is like Y1 and X1, and here Y2 and X2, and here X3, higher X3 and higher Y3. So if we add this point A, B, C and the line that we get, this is what we call income consumption curve, ICC. So this is what income consumption curve. So now see how it has an impact on the demand. Like say here, say commodity X on the horizontal axis, say here it is panel A, and here say in panel 2. So now in panel 2 we are trying to develop the demand curve for the commodity X, and here, so in panel 2 on the vertical axis it is price of X, and on the horizontal axis it is QX. Let us understand that way. So in panel 1 we saw like X is increasing. So like suppose here, so at X1 suppose price was P1 for X, and then I am demanding more of X, and following law of demand, price must have gone down from P1 to P2, and that's how we got another one point, like say M, then point N, and here X2. So from panel 1 my demand for X, commodity X, is increasing from X1 to X2 and X3. So now in the panel 2 we are trying to understand only for one commodity, which is X, and when commodity demand for quantity demanded for X is increasing from OX1 to OX2, so definitely price for X1 is actually reducing. That is law of demand, because of the law of demand. So when quantity demanded for X2 further increases, like from OX1 to OX2 to OX3, the assumption is price for particular commodity like X might have further decreased from P2 to P3, and then we get point O. And then if we add this point MNO, then we get demand function for X. With the help of these two panels, like panel 1 and 2, we are trying to explain that how due to change in income, how it impacts on the changes of the quantity demanded for two commodities like X and Y in the panel 1, and in the panel 2 as income increases, if demand for quantity increases for that particular commodity in case of normal goods, then what is the changes in the market, especially in the price? So price might have decreased, and therefore demand for X has increased. So here there are three relationships that we are trying to put it. One is income, and then consumption of that particular commodity, and then finally overall demand curve for that particular commodity, and here commodity X that we have taken as an example. So now let's move to income effect and income consumption curve in case of, say, inferior goods. So we'll not spend much time because we already know. So what is inferior goods definitions? We already know. Like say first, like say here, between in panel 1, say here commodity Y and commodity X. So when budget line AB is like income of any individual, and then small a is a tangent point where utility curve is tangent to budget line at point A. So now as income increases, so in by definition, in case of inferior goods, as my income increases, so budget line shifts from A to AB to A dash B dash, but then demand for X1 will be decreasing. So earlier OX1 amount of X1, and then now my demand decreases from OX to OX2. So at point B, where my utility like U2, and here say point B, and then another like further, as my income further increases and budget line shifts from A dash B dash to A double dash to B double dash, and then here say further demand for or quantity demanded for X has decreased because I got new equilibrium point like which is C. So this is what, if I add all point A, B and C, then we get the income consumption curve, like income consumption curve for inferior goods, right? So in case of inferior commodities, ICC, like income consumption curve, will look like this, which is towards like backward bending, upward sloping. So now let's move to the another one concept is like angel curves, and we'll try to show in case of normal and inferior goods. So what is an angel curve shows? This shows the relationship or functional relationship between the quantity of a goods consumed and consumer's income. So we already discussed this in details, how ICC, like income consumption curve, looks like, and what is the impact of the income effect. And here let us plot income and income of the consumer and also the quantity demanded for or consumed of that particular commodity. So like say here along with the vertical axis, if it is income of individual, and here say quantity demanded, and here y we can write as income of individuals, right? And here quantity demanded. So in case of normal goods, if my income increases, like say as my income increases, like from OY1 to OY2, at like say at OY1 amount of income, I'm consuming OX1 amount of quantity of commodity X, and say here point A, and my income increases, from OY1 to OY2, and then I'm consuming more because of the normal goods, like X is normal, so X is normal. So in this case, certainly consumption for X1, X will be increased from OX1 to OX2, and then we get new equilibrium point like B. And likewise, if we join this, all the points where income and quantity demanded for that particular commodity for one individual, then we get upward sloping curve. And this functional relationship that we say that Angel's curve in case of normal commodity. So in case of inferior commodity, like again income of an individuals here, and here quantity demanded, but in this case X is inferior commodity. So as my income increases, like say from at the initial level, like OY1 amount of income, then I'm demanding OX1 amount of X, quantity of X. Suppose my income increases from OY1 to OY2, then I'm reducing my quantity demanded for X2, X from OX1 to OX2, and then I get the new equilibrium point. If we add this, we get angel curves like backward bending upward curve, which is like angel curve for inferior. So to sum up this angel curve, so if we plot this like income here and then quantity demand, then angel curve will be upward sloping, and then it will go for backward bending, but then again upward moving. So up to this point, this is like in case of normal, and then second half, like the point on which it got backward bending upward moving curve is like inferior angel curve, but for the inferior. So this is called angel curve relationship that we have tried to show you with the help of this graphical illustrations. So I stop here, and these are the 3 books that I have used, and for further illustrations or for more examples, I would request you to go through these 3 references. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you in my next lecture.